Hey guys, welcome to another Holy Shed. It's great to have you around, and I hope that all is well with you and yours. We are doing fine. It's a bit crazy at the moment, but I had a lovely time at church this morning talking about the unpardonable sin. Really. I mean, any of you who are preachers and follow, the lectionary readings will know what I mean. Not the most straightforward gospel reading today. But if you fancy hearing my thoughts on, the unpardonable sin and Jesus kind of disowning his family, well, I'll post a link as soon as that's available and, you can take a listen. Meanwhile, you probably know by now what I'm doing here at the moment in the Holy Shed, mulling over aspects of my own story, in particular, how I ended up as a vicar or priest in the Church of England, and how I'm still processing some of the issues that this raises. I'm telling my story not just from the perspective of the outer narrative, stuff that happened, but also from the perspective of the inner narrative, how I've thought things through and wrestled with things, and how I am still processing stuff that's happening on the outside. And I'm doing this all in the hope that it may prove useful both to fellow priests and ministers on similar journeys, but also to everyone. I hope it'll prove helpful to everyone. When I was ordained, I had no intention of being a vicar in the technical sense. That is, I didn't want to lead a parish. I saw myself as more of a freelancing priest, really. However, when my predecessor at St. Luke's departed, the bishop urged me to take the job. And, our doubts notwithstanding, we went ahead. And that turned out to be one of the best decisions that we've ever made and led to, 19 or so of the happiest and most fruitful years of my life up to that point. But in the process, I needed to sort things out. I needed to sort out what I thought about ordination in the first place, not least because I'd always thought of priesthood as a Catholic thing. Plus, I disliked the whole clergy laity divide stuff. I certainly don't believe that God, in any shape or form, looks upon us and sees clergy and laity. We may indeed have different roles and functions in the church, but we are together the church, and I refuse any sense of class distinction between clergy and laity, though I do, sadly, sometimes see it. So look, here it is. I'm an ordained priest in the church, but I don't for an instant imagine that this makes me a different or better kind of Christian, much less a different or better kind of human being. As we're all too painfully aware, there have been, no doubt still are, priests who are wretched, really, prejudiced, sexually abusive, bullies, embezzlers, charlatans, or just plain unkind. We're all flawed, right? We're all flawed and vulnerable human beings, but having a bishop lay hands on us doesn't change that at all. Ordination means that the church entrusts me with a responsibility to carry out certain rites and rituals and to care for people in various ways. And I'm accountable to the church and to God in carrying them out with love and integrity. And that's something that I don't take lightly. But let's think for a moment about this whole notion of some people being called by God and others not. To be honest with you, I really don't like the language of calling. I think it's archaic and unhelpful. And I do know that, lots of people who are exploring ordination as a prospect for them find this a bit of a struggle when they're faced with someone who's asking them about their calling, when they feel called, how they feel called, and all that kind of stuff. I much prefer, actually, the more secular language of vocation, because we already recognize this as something broader, something that might apply to anyone in life, not just people in the church. And it's my belief that each and every one of us has a vocation in life, something which traces back to Our very gift of selfhood, the precious treasure at the core of us with which we were born. We each have combinations of energies, inclinations, passions, and talents which are intrinsic to who we are and which I would say amount to what our vocation in life is. They all help us to contribute in all kinds of ways to making the world a better place and to helping to create the kingdom of God in people's lives and situations. If we're lucky, we find employment that channels our vocation. But the fact is that isn't always possible. We live in a job market, and but there doesn't matter really, because there are many other ways in which our vocation, the inner call at the core of us, can find expression. One of the best ways I know to help us identify that core vocation in our life is with the Enneagram, and maybe I'll talk more about that in the Holy Shed some other time. But my real point here today is simply to underscore that however we define it, we all have a calling or a vocation, not just clergy. And I believe church should be a place where vocations can be unearthed and supported and cultivated, instead of propagating this silly impression that people who wear liturgical dresses and dog collars are called by God and the rest of us just get on with it. To be honest, despite being in some kind of church ministry since the tender age of 22, what did I know about anything? Despite this, I've never really had anything that I could describe as a call. Never had a Samuel experience, never, heard a voice from heaven or anything like that. But I do recognize my treasure, if you like, my selfhood gift, the capacities and passions which have shaped my ministry, but which might have found expression in other directions, in other aspects of life, and still be a holy vocation, even if they had nothing to do with religion or the church. I think of dear Vincent van Gogh here, who longed to be a church minister like his father, and the signs are he would have made a pretty wonderful minister, but he was turned down by the church. However, thank God, he discovered a greater ministry with brush and paint and canvas, bringing untold joy to millions and millions of people, despite only selling one painting during his whole lifetime. So what about this priesthood thing? Yeah? I mean, how have I, the child of a Christian tradition that judged priesthood to be papist skullduggery, how have I ended up at times in a frock and a dog collar? And how do I reconcile this with my current progressive spirituality and theology? Well, the simple and honest answer is that I am a pragmatist who lives with dichotomies. But then much of life is a dichotomy, isn't it? Because we don't live in an ideal world, and sometimes we have to live with the realities of life as it is and try to make the most of that. Now, as you may gather from what I've already said, my spirituality is essentially democratic. It's flat rather than pyramidal. And a big part of my struggle in the house church movement was my resistance to what I saw as a growing hierarchicalism. I dislike hierarchies of any sort. I'm a natural rebel in this way. I just dislike the pomposity and the self-importance and sometimes the abuse of hierarchies, which doesn't mean that I oppose leadership, of course not, but that's a different matter. I can't see any individual or group, I can't see that any individual or group of people have greater access to God than anybody else. Okay? No one requires a priest or a minister or anybody to lead them into God's presence or to represent God to them. In this sense, I would say we are all priests. We're all on a level ground. fundamentally, I believe in the priesthood of the community and each individual in that community. But this doesn't mean that there isn't a place for specific priesthood, however it's labelled or organised. I mean, look, Jesus never ordained any priests, right? He didn't show any demonstrable interest in structures or organisation of any kind. He remained distinctly disinterested and detached from that whole approach. Ordained priesthood, along with the entire shebang of ecclesiastical appointments, buildings, and organisational paraphernalia, it's not his doing. It's not what he set out to create. But it's followed in his wake. And the important thing to recognise is it's a human construct. And we must remember that nothing is set in stone. Nothing cannot evolve or change. Indeed, I think it must evolve and change if it's going to continue to be life-giving and to be a living entity. Now, of course, none of this invalidates structure and leadership and organisation. Of course not. Human life, including faith traditions, require organisation. It's part of being a community of people, but it must serve that community, right? It must serve a purpose rather than being something that is served, that is bowed down to and paid allegiance to. I think that organisation must be open to critique, to rethinking, to reform. I think there are many aspects of organised church life and religion which absolutely must be reformed in the not too distant future or die. In the Church of England, at least, priests are authorised to carry out certain rites and rituals which others are not authorised to do. Now, at an organisational level, I accept this, but I don't believe for a moment that my blessings or my prayers of consecration are necessarily better or more effective than anyone else's. Of course not. Until relatively recently, many people refused to accept the validity of women performing priestly duties. Many still don't accept it, ridiculously, but things change, and sometimes they have to change or die, and we'll have to see how priesthood pans out as we go forward in the future. Now, on a personal level, I take it as an honour. I take it as a privilege that I am authorised by the Church to perform priestly duties. I relish doing so, not because I think that I can do them better than other people, but because I'm part of a community which offers me the opportunity, and I'm so grateful for that. At a practical level, when I stood before the altar at St. Luke's, which helpfully was a round altar table that we could all gather around, and when I stood there surrounded by the gathered community, and I was never more happy than when we were shoulder to shoulder, sort of gathered together there without me standing up somewhere in an exalted place at the front. And when I did that, I saw myself as being entrusted with the priesthood of that community. I held it, but I didn't own it. I was a voice from the community, for the community, to the community. But to me, priesthood is essentially representative, and I love being a part of that. Sometimes priests are referred to as those who can perform the magic bits, right? I mean, it's mostly said in jest, tongue-in-cheek, but actually behind it there is a mentality in some parts of the Church of England which is based on and reinforces this whole notion of a priestly caste, of the specialness of the ordained priesthood. And, I don't believe in transubstantiation, the sort of Catholic notion of the bread and wine, the elements being literally turned into the body and blood of Christ. But actually, I do believe in the real presence of Christ in bread and wine in communion, but only because I believe that God is really present in every loaf of bread, in every bottle of wine, in every rock, bird, cloud in the sky, in every handful of sand or dirt, in every person. I believe that every jug, every glass of water is holy and as such blessed. Um, and all of this with no magic required. I'm happy to pray prayers of blessing over water, to consecrate bread and wine, but it's not that I am magically turning it into something else. It's almost a sort of bringing of what already is, acknowledging that, being grateful for that, and opening ourselves to the way in which water and bread and wine and all the earthly things can mediate and communicate God's life to us. I'll do it right now. As I say, essentially, I'm a pragmatist. I don't imagine that, say, wearing a dog collar indicates that I'm more holy or more special than anyone else. But I do know from experience that it can be um, an indicator which may be helpful and other times not so much. I always say it depends on how you wear it, who you are on the inside. I think that clerical garb and dog collars and the like can be worn in a way that communicates distance and pomposity and superiority and all those sort of things. But I think equally they can be worn in a way that is affirming and welcoming. Basically, it's a small piece of uniform, right, which says something to people, and it can convey openness to help, availability. I've many times sat in a pub wearing a dog collar, perhaps while writing a sermon, which I like to do, in a pub with a beer or a coffee. And I can't tell you how many times this has led to people asking if they can sit down and have a chat, buy me a drink even. I've had people make ad hoc confessions in pubs. I've known them weep as I look them straight in the eye and say, God forgives you, forgive yourself. I've prayed with people at the bar or in a corner when they've told me about friends or relatives who are seriously ill or when someone has passed away. I've had significant theological conversations with people in pubs, none of which would have happened if I hadn't worn a clerical collar. So, it's just a bit of plastic, but it can say something useful as well as the fact that it can say something very unhelpful. So I repeat, I don't see ordination as some sort of whiz-bang thing from heaven. I don't think of being a priest as something that makes us into some kind of holy magician, I don't imagine that dressing up or wearing a collar turns you into a different kind of person. Well, it shouldn't do anyway. These are mere symbols of a tradition that I have found to be at times incredibly useful and powerful in reaching into the lives of people, but very dependent on the kind of person that you are on the inside. That's what really matters. So I'm going to leave it there for now. But hear this, guys. You are beloved of God, right? You are called by God, every one of you, to shine in the world, to let your authentic self show through, and in so doing, to contribute to the increase of God's kingdom in the world. Priests aren't special, you are special. So I'm going to share a prayer with you now. I'm going to show you a little video of me reading one of my prayers, which conveys just this very thing. It's called Just Be. Maker of beaming buttercups, of all things wild and wonderful, may we learn to stand tall, never apologizing for who we are, but glowing in the beauty and assurance that all we need to do is be. Amen to that. So if you've got a drink handy, guys, I'd like you to just take a hold of it and join me. You see what I've got. And I'd like to propose a toast to every one of you. Yeah? A toast to your belovedness, to the divine call upon your life to just be in the world, to just be yourself. A toast to standing tall and refusing to allow guilt or self-deprecation to get you down. Friends to life, L'chaim. So, there we are for this time. If you like what I'm doing in the shed, you can support us. You can buy us a coffee. All you need to do is follow the link, which is on your screen now. And a thousand thanks to all of you who support us in this way and other ways. It's much, much appreciated. And that's just about it, really. I did a pause for thought this last Monday, and you can still catch that on BBC Sounds, on the Sounds app. But I'm also doing a pause this coming Tuesday. It's around about 7:50 and 7:20 in the morning on Radio 2. But it's always available later on Sound. So it'd be great to know that you're out there joining me for that. So there we are. I bid you farewell and hope that you have a wonderful week this coming week. And be kind. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to people around you. Be kind to the world. Stay human. And I leave you with a blessing.